Hey, we're gonna go ahead and get started here, and Kendra's gonna keep admitting people as they pop in, but for the sake of being on time, so you can all get back to work or whatever it is that you have planned for today, we're gonna go ahead and get started here. So, welcome to our webinar today. We do both work for SweetPea, so I do want to share that disclosure. So today's session is titled Plant-Based Eating for Sports Performance. Before we get started, I'd like to go through some housekeeping items. We'd like for you to keep yourself muted throughout the session, to keep background noise to a minimum because we will be recording this session. If you have questions, please do use our chat box function to type in your questions and we'll respond to them at the very end. We also will have some common questions about plant-based eating related to sports performance. So if those questions that you see are one of your questions, we'll be going through them. So one of the cornerstones to optimal performance is understanding how macro and micronutrients assist in recovery and performance progression, as well as your health. A plant-based diet was once seen as inadequate for athletes. However, more athletes now are following this way of eating and even outperforming their meat-eating counterparts. And so people are becoming more open to the idea of eating plant-based or veganism. So research has shown that a plant-based diet does offer athletes the greatest possible recovery times related to cell oxidation, injury prevention, better sleep, and allows athletes to train more effectively. Therefore, we're continuously progressing. So I'm just going to launch a poll. We just want to see what types of sports or activities everyone is interested in. So if you can just take that poll, and I'm going to go through our agenda for today, and then Kendra will launch the poll. So today we're going to start off with intros to our background so you can get to know us. We'll briefly cover what whole food plant-based eating is, explain the various energy systems and how various movements use these energy systems. We'll discuss the benefits of plant-based eating for athletes, and then we'll go through each of the macronutrients listed, and then we'll share supplements, ergogenic aids, whether you shouldn't take them, and which micronutrients are important for being plant-based. And then lastly, we'll open it up for questions. So let me just take a look at the poll. So it looks like most people are endurance athletes. Okay, perfect, wonderful. So we'll make sure we cater to a little more towards your end. Okay, so my name is Jen Nguyen. I'm Director of Nutrition at SweetPea Plant-Based Kitchen. I completed my undergrad in Nutrition and Dietetics from Cal State Long Beach, and then shortly after that, completed my internship at Cornell University. I'm originally from California and moved here to Rochester, upstate New York, about 4 years ago. I'm also a certified personal trainer and have been for about 8 years now. My background in sports nutrition has been working with UC Athletics. I did a lot of research with endurance athletes as well. I also worked with the LA Galaxy, which is a Major League Soccer team. And then, of course, my experience in personal training, I have been able to share nutrition with my everyday athletes. And Kendra?
All right, my name is Kendra Horn. I'm a registered dietitian and certified health education specialist. I've been a dietitian for a little over 14 years. I'm also a plant-based. I've been plant-based for about 11 years. And prior to that, I was a lacto-ovo vegetarian from high school all the way through college and early into my career. I have worked with students, many of whom are in the military and have a great interest in being physically fit in order to be able to stay in the military. I've worked with groups of military individuals who are runners. I also am a runner myself. Enjoy weightlifting and yoga. And I really like to help people learn about how to eat a plant-based diet and how to do it in a healthy way. All right, so before we get really into sports nutrition and being an athlete and on a whole food plant-based diet, I think it's important to define what a whole food plant-based diet is. So let's start with the word diet. We tend to have negative feelings associated with this word. We hear diet and I don't know about you all, but like I kind of cringe, like, oh, thinking something that's short term, a quick fix, something that's going to leave you very hungry, but will result in weight loss. Or maybe you think of something that a dietitian in a hospital or a doctor might put you on, like a diabetic diet or a low sodium diet. But when Jen and I say the word diet, we're referring to the foods and beverages that you regularly consume. And so if you eat a vegetarian diet and you're eating a lot of plants, that is your diet. That's your way of eating. If you're eating a standard American diet and you're eating a lot of processed foods and animal-based foods, that is your diet. And this leads to habitual nourishment, meaning that the foods and beverages that you regularly consume can either lead you to health and wellness, or the foods and beverages that you regularly consume can lead you to disease and not feeling so good. All right, so let's talk about what is plant-based eating. And I just want to, before Jen jumps to the next slide, I just want to show that hopefully all of you are familiar with plant-based eating, so you don't think that we just eat lettuce. So this shows you that there are things besides lettuce that people on a plant-based diet do eat, things that are very filling and satisfying. But on a plant-based diet, we aren't including any sort of animal products. And we tend to get hung up on the things that we don't include. But I think it's important to keep in mind the sheer number of plants that are available to us, with different types of fruits and vegetables and grains and nuts and seeds, way more than the animals that we typically consume. So we have a lot more variety when you think about it that way. So we include fruits and vegetables and grains in their whole form. We also include nuts and seeds and legumes and things that are minimally processed. So plant-based milks, tofu, whole wheat bread, whole wheat pasta. And then we don't include any sort of animal-based food. So no meat, poultry, or eggs, no seafood, dairy or dairy products, including cheese and yogurt. And we also don't include processed foods. And this tends to surprise a lot of my clients, and probably Jen's too, who aren't very familiar with a whole food plant-based diet. And one of those things is oil. We don't include oil because it's a highly processed food. And this is really, I don't know, counterculture to what we would hear if you go to a doctor and they say, eat oil because it's olive oil because it's heart healthy. But we know that oil has been highly processed, so a lot of the nutritional benefits have been removed. It's also basically, it's straight lipids, so you're getting a lot of calories without the nutritional benefit. If someone's eating a diet that's comprised of a lot of animal-based fats, and then they switch to using more olive oil or canola oil instead, then it's heart healthy because it's healthier for you than saturated fat from animals, but not just to include it for heart health benefits in and of itself. And then the last thing we want to touch on are just the different types of vegetarian diets that there are out there. I mentioned that I was a lacto-ovo vegetarian. So lacto meaning that I consumed milk and other dairy products like cheese and yogurt, and ovo meaning that I consumed eggs. There's also pescatarian, so someone who would eat mostly plants, but then also include some fish. Same with politarian, so they include chicken. And then there's vegan and whole food plant-based. And there's a little bit of confusion here because a whole food plant-based diet is vegan, but not all vegan diets are whole food plant-based. So if you think about Impossible Burgers and chips and Oreos, these are all vegan, but they're highly processed. So they wouldn't be considered as a food that we would include on a whole food plant-based diet.
Okay, I'm going to be sharing on different energy systems. So this is going to be a bit heavy on content, but it should make sense to you athletes. So when food enters our bodies in the form of carbohydrates, fats, and proteins, they then must be further broken down during digestion into glucose, fatty acids, and amino acids. So glucose, fatty acids, and amino acids are molecules and compounds that are transported to our bloodstream to be used in a metabolic pathway that will then create energy or ATP. Now, depending on what type of energy is needed, which is associated with type of sport or position the athlete's participating in, the body will use certain amounts of carbohydrates, fats, and proteins to develop either rapid rates of energy or ATP or slower rates of energy or ATP. So the three different energy systems that you see on this chart show the rate at which ATP needs to be generated during training, exercise, or sport. And our bodies can actually be fluctuating throughout these three energy systems that you see here. And at some points during training, one energy system may be more dominant than others. So the first one that you see here is the ATP-CP. CP stands for creatine phosphate. That's the blue line, which represents high intensity, short duration bursts, about 0 to 30 seconds. Here, the body can actually supply quick energy quickly because oxygen is not needed for the process. Nutritionally, what happens is the body will use any energy stores from the body in the form of creatine phosphate. The next energy system is the anaerobic glycolysis or lactic acid system, and this is the red line. So this represents high to medium intensity movements lasting up to about 30 seconds and debatable between where you read, but sometimes up to 3 minutes maximum. Here, oxygen is not required to resynthesize ATP, and glucose is the main molecule responsible for production of ATP, thus energy can be produced quickly. One thing to note is that this energy system is also called the lactic acid system, and that's because no oxygen is used in the process. Lactic acid is produced as an end product, and that causes that burning feeling, rapid heart rate, rapid breathing, sometimes to the extreme can cause nausea and even stomach pain. Here, the body uses blood glucose and stored muscle glycogen for energy. And then the last energy system, which I think we are all a part of, is the green one, which is the aerobic or oxidative energy system. And I think the name sort of gives it away. So this is where low intensity, long duration endurance activity uses a combination of carbohydrates, proteins, and fats to replenish ATP. So the definition of long activity is activity lasting for more than 120 seconds. Since the energy requirements here are lower compared to the anaerobic glycolysis system, pyruvic acid is formed versus lactic acid. Now, the body does use pyruvic acid to further supply ATP or energy, and since this system happens in the mitochondria, which is the powerhouses in our cells, it has a larger capacity for producing energy, and so lots of ATP produced here. And in this slide, you see here the two different, three energy systems into two columns. They're broken down into various sports. The anaerobic column includes the creatine phosphate energy system. Examples of that system, creatine phosphate system include Olympic weightlifting, powerlifting, discus, high jump. Think of like sports where you're doing quick bursts of movements, and in certain sports, brief movements can also use the PC or CP systems, such as like kicking the ball in soccer or rugby or football or pitching a baseball. Examples of sports in the anaerobic glycolytic system include a combination of movements such as basketball, soccer, a HIIT class. And then there's, of course, the aerobic sports, which are endurance type sports such as distance running, swimming, and cycling. And so one thing to remember is that each of these energy systems can be used throughout a sport depending on the terrain, the position, and really the movement pattern. So you can be using all of the glucose, fatty acids, and amino acids in those different energy systems. And of course, body type, body composition is important to note. There is such thing as having too high of body fat, but you can see here that depending on the sport, body fat percentage, muscle mass percentage varies from athlete to athlete and to sport to sport. Um, with having too high of body fat, the concern is that there are also increases in body weight, and body fat percentage will actually change how our body uses energy, an energy source. And over time, that can have implications for further for development of chronic diseases such as insulin resistance and metabolic syndrome. So it is important to, according to the sport, to have appropriate body compositions.
All right, so next we're going to talk about the benefits of plant-based eating. And really, if you're an athlete or not, eating a plant-based diet means that you are going to be having a lot of benefit to you. And the main benefit is your health. We know that individuals who follow a plant-based diet have a lower risk for chronic diseases. So if you think about the diseases that most Americans are dying from, heart disease, diabetes, dementia, having excess weight, all of these things, we have less risk when we eat a healthier diet, when we eat a plant-based diet. And part of the reason we have lower risk for chronic diseases is because of our decreased intake of saturated fat. And saturated fat is the fat that we find primarily in animal-based foods. So when we consume less saturated fat, it brings our blood cholesterol levels down, which helps to decrease our risk for heart disease and stroke. We also increase our intake of mono and polyunsaturated fatty acids, and these are considered to be more heart healthy, and we find these in plants. We also have increased fiber intake, so this helps to reduce our risk for cancer of the colon. It also helps us to feel satisfied for longer, so we feel fuller for longer because of all the fiber in plants. This might not be good for all athletes, though, to have a belly full of fiber before you go on like a really long run or something like that. But overall, having the fiber really helps to manage our weight because we feel fuller for longer. It helps us to not have excess weight. And we don't know if all of the benefits for plant-based eating is because of the absence of meat, or if it's because of the wider variety and larger consumption of plants when we're following a plant-based diet, or if it's a combination of having healthier lifestyle factors, because a lot of times people who eat a plant-based diet and any type of vegetarian diet also tend to be more physically active and don't smoke and don't drink excessively. So we're not really sure exactly. There's a lot more research that shows the benefit of plants versus the detrimental effects of meat. But just recently, there was a large study released that shows a link between meat consumption and risk of ischemic heart disease. All right, so talking about athletes who are plant-based, there's definitely benefits to being a plant-based athlete. So at the beginning, Jen mentioned increased performance. And part of that is because we have an increased intake of vitamins and minerals. And these are a lot of vitamins and minerals that on the standard American diet might be lacking. And one of those especially is magnesium. Magnesium we find in nuts and seeds, legumes, green leafy vegetables, and whole grains. So things that aren't really included on the standard American diet. And magnesium is responsible for helping with increasing our oxygen distribution and for muscle contraction. And so it really helps to improve your performance. Also, when you're eating plants, you're eating a lot of carbohydrate, but these are carbohydrates that are healthy for us. If you think about whole wheat pasta versus white pasta, we're consuming healthy forms of carbohydrate, and carbohydrate is what fuels our body with glucose. And so the more glucose we have in our system, the better we're able to perform. We also will have an intake of more naturally occurring nitrates. So this is different from the nitrites and nitrates that are added to processed meat. These are naturally occurring ones that happen in things like beets and other root vegetables and leafy greens. And they actually help to increase nitric oxide. And this helps to lower our blood pressure. It helps with muscle contraction. And so it really can help with the types of exercise that require quick bursts of speed and use of energy. In recovery, we also see benefits from eating a plant-based diet. And this is again because of all those vitamins that we're consuming. Plants also contain phytochemicals, and these are, it sounds scary, but these are really good things for us to consume. They're things that the plant creates to be able to protect itself from radiation from the sun and from bugs and insects and things like that. And when we consume phytochemicals, a lot of them act as antioxidants. And vitamins also act as antioxidants, and they help to reduce oxidative stress in our body. And oxidative stress is caused by free radicals, and free radicals develop just during our activities of daily living. So eating and breathing and exercise can increase free radicals in our body. So when we are consuming things that act as antioxidants, they help to neutralize those free radicals and reduce oxidative stress, therefore allowing our body to recover more quickly. There's other vitamins like vitamin D we show here, helps to balance out our immune function and inflammation. So allowing our immune response to work like it should, and to increase recovery for the people who follow a plant-based way of eating. All right, so we're going to talk about macronutrients next. Macronutrients provide us with energy. We don't get energy from micronutrients, the vitamins and minerals. We only can get energy from our macronutrients. So the first one is carbohydrates. And we've talked about how important carbohydrate is, but the amount of carbohydrate that you need depends on the type of training that you're participating in. So the more intense, the longer you're training, the more carbohydrate you're going to need to be able to fuel that activity. And determine your weight in kilograms, you take your weight in pounds and you divide it by 2.2, because there's 2.2 pounds in a kilogram. And so that will tell you your weight in kilograms. So then you can multiply that kilograms by 3, by 5, and get your range. The timing of carbohydrates is important. We want to be sure to include some carbohydrate before we go out to train. So if we have to wake up a little bit earlier to sneak in a piece of fruit or something like that, we want to eat something that's going to be lower on the glycemic index, but carbohydrate rich, to give our cells a ready supply of glucose when we go out to start training. During exercise, if you're going to be exercising or training for 60 or 90 minutes or longer, it's important to have a ready supply of glucose. And it's also important to practice and be sure that you're training with whatever it is that you're going to be using. So if you're going to be running a marathon or something like that, you don't want to like go out using something new marathon day. You want to experiment with that and see what your body can tolerate. So things like sports drinks or gummies. Some people will chew on some like dried fruit or something like that, just to give them a ready source of glucose. And then post-exercise, within an hour after exercising, it's important to eat something that's going to be higher on the glycemic index. So thinking about like a piece of whole wheat bread and maybe a banana and some peanut butter. In that first hour after training is when the body is best able to replenish its glycogen stores. So we want to be sure that when we finish exercising, we are including some carbohydrate there too. And then the general recommendation, sorry, Jen, throwing something out, throwing something in. The general recommendation for everyone is 45 to 65% of our calories coming from carbohydrate. And so as an athlete, you're definitely going to be on the higher end of that to be able to fuel your training. Okay, now I'm ready. Okay, so the next macronutrient we're going to talk about is fats. And we used to be really afraid of fats, and now we're really afraid of carbohydrates, but we really need all three different types of macronutrients. And fats provide us with a lot of energy, and we need them in order to be able to metabolize protein and carbohydrate efficiently. Fat also provides us with more calories per gram than carbohydrate and protein does. Fat provides us with 9 calories per gram, whereas protein and carbohydrate provide us with 4 calories per gram. So when you're an athlete and you have higher calorie needs, including healthy sources of fat, really helps to ensure that you're meeting your calorie needs. And any concerns that we may have about eating a higher or a diet with more fat is really negated by all the exercise that we're participating in. So we don't have to worry about that so much if we're consuming healthy sources of fat. So of course, plant-based, whole sources of fat. And we do have some essential fatty acids, and these are fatty acids that our body isn't able to make. They're essential, so we have to eat them. We have the omega-6 fatty acids and omega-3. I'm going to start with the omega-3. So the one that's essential is called alpha-linoleic acid. And we find ALA in things like flax seeds, chia seeds, you see it there at the bottom, English walnuts, not black walnuts, tofu, different types of beans, Brussels sprouts, avocados, some flaxseed oil, and also fortified foods you'll find with DHA and EPA. But when we consume something that contains ALA, our body is actually able to turn some of it into DHA and EPA. So we want to be sure that we're including sources of omega-3 in our diet every day. We also have omega-6, and this is linoleic acid. We find linoleic acid in a lot of the same things that we find omega-3s in, but for most Americans, our omega-6 is coming from oils, so from our oil consumption. And we want a ratio of omega-6 to omega-3 to be somewhere like 3 to 1, 4 to 1, but for most Americans, it's 15 to 1 or 17 to 1. And the reason this is important is because the omega-3 fatty acids really help to reduce inflammation. They help to keep our blood liquid and prevent clotting. They help to keep our blood vessels open and dilated. And omega-6 has the opposite effect. Omega-6 is more inflammatory. It causes constriction of our blood vessels. It increases the clotting capabilities of our blood. And so we want to be sure that we're having a good balance there. And that's where reducing our intake of oils really helps to boost our intake of omega-3 fatty acids. And the general recommendation for fats for the general public is usually 20 to 35% of calories from fat. But because athletes need more calories, it's been shown that anywhere from 23 to 43% of your calories from fat can be very effective for improving performance in athletes.
And next we have proteins. So proteins are necessary to maximize skeletal muscle adaptation when training. The combination of exercise and dietary protein actually doubles the rate of muscle protein synthesis, meaning your body's ability to create muscle. Aerobic exercise is generally not associated with muscle building, but resistance training is, and higher intensity exercise. But that's not to say you don't need muscle for aerobic exercise. You do need it. Recommendations for the average plant-based person, experts recommend 1 to 1.1 grams per kilograms because there's a slight decrease in digestibility of plant proteins. For endurance athletes, protein needs are lower because, again, the muscle protein synthesis is increased for only 2 to 3 hours after performance of aerobic exercise. And then in resistance training athletes, it's higher because it's primarily anabolic, and resistance exercise can stimulate muscle protein synthesis for at least 2 days after exercise. Amino acid is that molecule that that comes out of proteins. It is used for energy contribution in exercise, but it's actually much lower than carbohydrates. It contributes about 2 to 4%, but it does have more influence on your skeletal muscle protein turnover. You also have essential amino acids. So there are 9 essential amino acids, and you have 3 branched chain amino acids, which are oxidized to the greatest extent during activity and when it's in the body. 2 essential amino acids that I want to touch on are lysine and leucine. These are especially important because they're the limiting amino acids, which means that they're in short supply for those who are vegan or plant-based athletes. Leucine is one of those amino acids that have been newly studied to show that it's an anabolic trigger, meaning that it's a modulator of protein synthesis where it increases the transport of other amino acids into the muscle. Plant-based athletes can usually meet their leucine needs by combining a variety of combinations of different types of plant-based proteins, such as lentils, tofu, black beans, and peanut butter. So recommendations for exercise. So pre-exercise, it's recommended to have about 6 grams of essential amino acids before resistance training. When compared to post-exercise, it's more, of course. It's recommended about 10 grams of essential amino acids combined with carbohydrates, because again, your body is going to be using up glucose first and foremost for energy, and then muscle also consists of glycogen. If you've been in the sports nutrition world and heard experts speak, you've heard that the window of opportunity to have like a post-workout snack is usually within like 30 to 45 minutes. But research shows that it can be up to 2 hours. You're also still recovering after, depending on what type of exercise it is. You can also be recovering up to 2 days. If you're looking at a ratio of how much carbohydrates to protein, it's usually a 3-to-1 ratio or 4-to-1 ratio. So what that might look like is 36 grams of carbohydrates to 12 grams of protein. So that can be like a whole wheat peanut butter sandwich with a banana in that. So that's just one example. And sources of protein include nuts, seeds, legumes, whole grains like quinoa, and then of course your soy food. So I want to talk briefly about soy foods because there's still a lot of conflicting knowledge on this topic. The reason is because there are different studies that have been done on soy and have varied greatly from the type of soy that's used to the type of study, animal versus human studies. Now, the type of soy that's found in foods can come in the form of whole foods like tofu, soybeans, and then you have your processed foods like isolated soy products like veggie burgers, powders. There is a time and place for those things. So with that being said, this will actually change the concentration of isoflavones, which is a phytoestrogen. There's not enough phytoestrogen found in whole soy foods to alter hormonal estrogen. So with that being said, if we do eliminate whole soy foods, we will also eliminate nutrients like B vitamins, fiber, potassium, magnesium. It's a very high quality protein that's considered a complete protein. So the takeaway is that soy is unique, it's widely studied. The studies have conflicting conclusions about soy, but overall it is beneficial and it is a great alternative to red and processed meats. And if you have questions about soy, we can talk about that after. And then one of the last topics that we want to touch on are supplements. So the supplement industry is $1 billion industry, and it's very important to know what you're taking and always focus on food first. So we want to just make that clear that we do focus on food first. Multivitamins have been heavily debated, and the research shows that it's unnecessary unless you have a deficiency. So the vitamins that we do recommend, being a plant-based athlete, will be vitamin B12, vitamin D, and your omega-3 fatty acids. Now, if you do choose to use ergogenic aids, we do recommend ensuring that they are certified by a third-party company, such as NSF, which you see the logo there, and then Informed Choice is another one. And then there's also the GMP, which is a good manufacturing practice, which you'll find on dietary supplements as well. These two companies, supplement companies will go to these companies, they'll get their products tested, and then this ensures that there are no banned substances in them. So your pro, elite, Olympic, and collegiate athletes all use this rule for supplementation, and if they don't use it, they actually get fined. Supplements that have been researched in sports include creatine, beetroot powder, collagen, beta-alanine, and there are several others as well. And so for you endurance athletes and your strength athletes as well, we listed here some products that are third-party certified that are used by Olympic and pro athletes. And a lot of these brands will carry other products as well, including plant-based powders and options. So just a few that you can list here and take a look at. But remember that we always want to focus on food first. And if you have questions about whether or not you should supplement, I would encourage you to reach out to a dietitian or someone who is aware of your performance status, or even a strength coach or athletic trainer. So protein supplements are huge. They're a big market in the supplement industry. So whey protein and casein you see here are both animal products. Whey is a byproduct of cheese making. So if you've ever opened up a cow or dairy container of yogurt and wondered what the liquid is on top, that's whey. It's a collection of proteins that you can find, produced primarily from cow. And then cow milk contains about 80% casein and 20% whey. Whey is a fast digesting or fast acting type of a protein. Casein is a slower digesting. And then you have your soy, pea, hemp, and rice. I'm going to talk about soy because that's one that's been highly researched on the topic of protein supplements. So soy protein, again, it's a high quality plant-based protein that is actually comparable to milk, meat, and eggs. Soy protein has a digestion rate that's in intermediate, so it's not fast, it's not slow, it's right in the middle. So the intermediate weight may actually allow for soy protein to have an extended window of muscle protein synthesis. So even though you see a lot of products, recovery products claim to have whey in it, it's wise to take a look at the soy protein products as well, because they offer additional benefits that can make an important contribution to what you're doing. So just some notes on amino acids. Soy contains about 300% more arginine and 30% more glutamine compared to whey. And these two amino acids may bring additional benefits such as immunity and hydration to athletes. So should you take whey? Our thoughts are no. Studies may show whey being superior to others on this chart, but you can see here that soy is actually next best when you're combining real food in conjunction with the soy-based protein powders. You're getting an even greater benefit than just the whey protein. So we support the whey protein powders, but again, also making sure that you have other foods in there as well. And before I go through these summary points, Kendra and I also wanted to point out that one thing that we didn't get to talk about on this fourth slide was hydration. That's really, really important. Dehydration occurs when you lose about 1% of your body weight. So that's about 1.5 pounds in a 150-pound athlete. So if you want to figure out whether or not you're losing that 1% body weight, I would encourage you to weigh yourself before you go and do your sport, and then weigh yourself after to see whether or not you're well hydrated. The other good indicator, of course, is your urine. So the impacts of dehydration related to performance are physical, it's also physiological, and then it can also provide cognitive disruptions to the body. It's recommended that you want at least 20% of your daily water consumed from food, and then 80% from fluids. So food sources, just such as melons, cucumbers, most of your vegetables and fruits will have higher water content. Water recommendations do vary from person to person, but the general guide is that you should not be drinking any less than one liter of water. So you want to be drinking 1 or more liters of water, because the minimum urine flow is about 500 milliliters. Okay, so that's already half of that one liter. Transcutaneous water loss, which is water that just sort of exits your skin because your skin is porous, that's about 400 milliliters a day. And then respiratory loss through breathing is about 200 milliliters per day. So in total, your body just from living is losing about 1.1 liters. And so when you throw in the factor of exercise and also electrolyte loss, we then have to calculate for those needs and make up for that as well. So we just wanted to reiterate, hydration is very important. Even though we don't have a slide on it, we do recommend that for athletes. So just some summary points here. Athletes' body types vary according to their sport and position. All athletes can benefit greatly from incorporating 100%, and of course 50 to 90%, anything that's more than where you are before you'll definitely start to feel differences in energy levels, performance. And then you have your plant-based athletes do experience reduced recovery time, more energy, and reduced risk of chronic disease. Dietary supplements do play a role, but be informed and also read the labels. And then elite athletes can experience issues such as eating disorders, bone health issues, and also injury. So we're not immortal. We can be subject to injury. So it is important to pay attention to what you're putting into your body. And especially if you're someone who exercises frequently, to also pay attention to the types of foods that you're eating as well if you're looking to compete or be a competitive athlete. So with that, we're going to go ahead and open it up to questions. What we're going to do is, if you have a question and it's not listed here on this common question, please go ahead and type it in the chat box. But Kendra and I are going to go through each of these questions to help answer some of the things, and we're just going to go sort of rapid fire here. So the first question is, do I have to be 100% plant-based to reap the benefits? So I just explained that. So no, you can still gain advantage by incorporating mostly plant-based into your routine, because the more that you can incorporate that, you're gonna, start to feel better in terms of like reducing your oxidative stress and inflammation overall. And then second question, this is for Kendra. Where do you get your protein from on a plant-based diet, and can you meet those needs?
And the answer is yes. I will say this is always the second question I get when someone finds out you're plant-based. The first is, what do you eat? And then the second is, well, how do you get protein? And Jen talked about protein earlier. And so we get protein from plants, of course. Almost all foods contain protein. Fruit isn't going to have very much protein, and of course, oils aren't going to have any protein. But we get them primarily on a plant-based diet from our beans, our whole grains, our nuts, and our seeds, but also from the wonderful soy, so edamame, tempeh, tofu, and soy milk. And sorry, you can meet your needs. If you have concerns about getting enough protein, a dietitian can definitely help you with that. And we provided calculations too, so you can track your protein intake and see if you're meeting your protein needs.
And then the third common question is, will I be starving even though I'm exercising for more than 60 minutes per day? Again, as Kendra mentioned, we do calculate out your needs and help you develop a plan that has the right ratio of macronutrients, so you won't be starving. The other thing is you have to think about the amount of fiber. So Kendra had mentioned that carbohydrates are important because of the fiber content in them to help with satiety levels. Fats are also important for that as well, and then also protein. So if you're having the right combinations of foods and that they're whole foods, you're likely not going to be starving, even though you're exercising for more than 60 minutes per day, but your needs are going to be definitely increased. So Kendra, why do you need more calories than the average person if you're an athlete?
Because you're burning more calories. So there's a lot of things that go into the amount of calories that an individual needs, but the one that has the greatest variance is the amount of exercise that you're participating in. So the more you're moving, the more you're training, the harder you're training, the longer you're training, the more calories you'll need to support that level of physical activity. And after exercise, your metabolism is increased, and so you can continue to burn more calories than someone who hasn't been exercising. So you definitely have to be sure that you're eating enough calories, getting enough carbohydrates, so you don't end up underperforming.
Thank you, Kendra. And so Phyllis asked us a question. So she said, many people think of eating as entertainment or social activity. How do you switch this thinking in your clients? So I can respond first, and then Kendra, if you want to jump in with maybe some of your experience working with clients, that would be great. So yes, eating is very much entertainment based and very social, and it can still be that way. When we see our clients, it does take time. So there's a lot of structure up front. I think a big part of it too is the education. So when you start to educate yourself on how these foods work in the body, just for health reasons, I think people will slowly start to make that switch because eating is very much linked to the information that you know. When we associate and constantly associate eating with entertainment, that just becomes the way that we see food. However, if you start to educate yourself and immerse yourself in why nutrition is important for health, why is it important for sport or whatever it is that you're doing, you'll more likely be able to make that switch. So that's going to happen over time, Phyllis. It's not a flip of the switch. It takes time to do that. So I hope that answers your question.
And I would just add that with my clients, I really work to help them be attuned with their body and paying attention to how different foods make them feel. And so when you're finding that you're feeling so much better on a whole food plant-based diet, and then they maybe go out with their friends or something like that and eat something that maybe wouldn't be whole food plant-based, and paying attention to the differences in how they feel energy-wise and just physically, it really helps them to eat less of those foods and to eat in a more healthy fashion just because they feel better.
Gary's question, do you lose a lot of nutrient value when you cook vegetables? So it depends, Gary. So it depends on the method of cooking. So if you're boiling vegetables to where all the nutrients are leached into the water, you're definitely going to lose a lot of nutrient value. Cooking, heat methods will change the chemical composition of foods. So for example, cooked kale will actually offer more calcium than raw kale. So cooking will change the nutrient value, but depending, again, if you're not overcooking vegetables, you won't, lose the nutrient value of these foods. And then the other thing to consider too is, you're going to get some nutrients from the foods that you're eating if it's cooked. So I'm just going to use our sweet pea meals for example. So even though our sweet pea meals are cooked, they're also purchased from a local source here in upstate New York. So you're already eliminating that factor of transportation where nutrients start to diminish over time from transportation. So you still have value as long as you're eating those whole foods. And then you also have to look at the fiber intake as well and the food as a whole. So I hope that answers your question. Kendra, do you have anything to add to that?
Just something silly. My grandmother used to drink the water left over from cooking vegetables, and she called it pot liquor. But if you think about making stews and things like that, all of those nutrients are still going to be present in that stew and that soup. But cooking quickly, like microwaving or steaming very quickly, that helps you to retain the nutrient value.
Thank you. Gary's other question was, if you don't have protein after a hard exercise session, you lose muscle building value of exercise. Is this resistance training, Gary? You can unmute yourself too.
I guess it would be both. It would be weightlifting, and also like this morning I went for a 25-mile bike ride, and I pushed myself pretty hard in it. I didn't have anything to eat afterwards because I took a shower and came to this session. So do I lose the value, the muscle development value of the hard ride that I did?
So this is a tricky question. So it depends on how much protein you had in the day as well, because protein throughout the day will also stay in the body. I forget the duration of how long those proteins stay in your body. We do recommend having some sort of like a post-workout snack after a hard exercise routine like that, because what happens when you think about cycling, for example, and it sounds like you were cycling pretty hard, you are using a lot of glycogen stores that are inside of the muscle. And so once those cells are sort of depleted from the energy stores, it's going to be looking for glucose to resupply that muscle cell with energy. And so what happens when over time, if this starts to just happen day after day, if you're not repleting or repleting the glycogen stores, your body will eventually start to use up muscle in the form of energy to use that for energy.
Okay.
Does that
So
make sense?
So what I heard you say, I think, is that I've got a 2-hour window too, right, to do that.
The quicker the better, though. So
Okay.
the quicker the better. Yeah.
And the other thing is, like, before I rode this morning, I had oatmeal that I out of the big box, not the sugary one, with blueberries, walnuts, nutty almond butter, crunchy almond butter, and bananas in it. And I have that every morning. So is that enough protein, you think? So when I ride for an hour and a half, 2 hours, let's say, does that kind of carry me through from a protein perspective, you think?
We would have to sort of lay that meal out and then also calculate your protein needs to be able to, clearly say like how much protein you need. But right off the bat, just hearing what you've listed, it may be enough because you have your nuts, you have your oats that will have protein in it, you have the almond butter that will also have a source of protein in it as well. Athletes generally, again, need a little bit more. I can share with you that probably is something that I would share with my general population clients. For you, it might be beneficial to add other things like hemp seeds in there, chia seeds that add additional protein
I
as
do
well.
put hemp seeds in it too.
Okay.
Yeah.
There's also plant-based milks that you can cook the oatmeal in, or pour that on top too. So those are other ways to increase the protein as well. But generally, rule of thumb is for most athletes, or just even the general population, your protein intake should be evenly distributed throughout the day, because your body can take up to anywhere between 20 to 35 grams of protein in one sitting. So having and maximizing that protein intake is going to be the best thing to do for your body, and slowly getting there too. So you don't want to make a big jump from 5 grams of protein to 20 grams, because your kidneys need that time to sort of adjust and get used to the protein intake. But anything more than 35 grams is sort of wasted, and you're taxing your kidneys to work harder than it needs to.
Okay. So is almond butter, is that a plant-based, almond milk, is that a plant-based milk?
It is a plant-based milk. I usually will recommend soy milk, and I think Kendra does too. We'll recommend soy milk for something that's higher in protein. There's also flax milk plus protein as well, and that's something that I personally use. So it has about 8 grams of protein per cup, and I think the soy milk does too. Kendra, did you have anything else to add to Gary's question?
I don't. I would just say that pre-exercise, the protein is important, but you really want to be sure to be focusing on your carbohydrate intake to fuel your muscles. So that would be my primary focus pre-exercise.
So a lot of carbs before with some protein, then afterwards more protein to.
So immediately after, more carbohydrates and a little bit of protein, and then after that, they call it a snack, post-workout snack. After that snack, then you can have the 20 to 30 grams of protein in your meal.
Okay.
Because what happens is you have to replete your glycogen stores, and you have to bring your body up to normal, and that's by consuming more carbohydrates than other nutrients, and then starts the rebuilding process, or the progression from there, which is where protein will come in and start to actually build muscle.
Okay.
Does that make sense, Gary?
And, I've always wondered what that should look like, so I really appreciate the answers and the clarity about it. Thank you.
Of course, we love questions. Any other questions from our attendees? It doesn't have to be sports related. It can be general nutrition related too, if you would like. Nobody?
I'll say with my college students, a common thing I hear a lot is my students will think that they are building protein because they're eating protein, but to build muscle. It's the movement, the actual weight bearing activity, the lifting of weights that helps you to build muscle. Eating adequate protein helps with the muscle generation and synthesis and healing, but any excess protein is going to be stored as fat. So it's really the activity that builds the muscle. It's the carbohydrate that allows your body to lift heavier weights, and then it's the timing of the protein and having adequate protein that helps with muscle synthesis and healing. And we
Thank you,
still
Kendra.
deliver meals.
Yeah, yes, we do still deliver meals, and it's a 40-mile radius if you're curious. If you live out in Naples or Penn Yan out in that area, what we do is we meet clients at the Canandaigua post office between like 9:30 and 11. You can pick up there. I wanted to add one more thing to Kendra's. She did bring up a really good point, is the exercise and the protein work together. So a good way to track whether or not you're progressing in the right direction is your numbers. So if you're someone who resistance trains or does classes, pay attention to how much weight you're lifting and what your capabilities are, because chances are if you're not progressing in that, you're not eating enough or you're underfueling. If you are able to progress, the chances are you are actually building muscle. So that's a good point. Thank you, Kendra, for bringing that up. Bobby asked, if you're not strenuously exercising but cycling for 3 to 4 hours, do you need to do the carbohydrate and protein refresh, or have you not lost enough to worry about it? This is a tough one, Bobby. So the cycling, not strenuous, is it moderate intensity?
Yes.
Are you sweating and perspiring?
Only if there's a hill.
Okay.
We'll go out and just bike for 4 hours, but I just wondered, was I needing to make sure I have protein and carbohydrates in a certain balance at the end of the workout?
Yeah, you definitely will. So if you look at the energy system chart, the 3 to 4 hours of cycling, that would be the aerobic system, right? So in the aerobic system, you do use a combination of carbs, proteins, and fats. Longer duration. So I'm working with an ultra endurance athlete right now, Cruz, and he actually now is starting to, or was transitioning, still does a combination of carbs, proteins, and fats. Now he's actually starting to focus more on carbohydrates and a little bit more fat. So it's not significantly high, but just a little bit more in terms of like a fat source. So there's very little research on fat adaptation, but if you do try it, it's recommended that you try it during, again, your training, as Kendra mentioned, with the carbohydrates. So,
Thank you.
does that help?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Any other questions? Dana, any questions? Sorry, you're on the screen, so I'm picking on your screen. All right, well, thank you so much for participating in our webinar today. We hope that you gained a lot of information from it. We are posting this webinar on our YouTube. So if you just search Sweet Pea Plant-Based Kitchen on our YouTube, you'll be able to have access to everything, so you can pause and retake your notes or calculate out your needs. What we do want to point out is that, again, Kendra and I both are dietitians. So if you are interested in nutrition coaching and not doing our meals and you want to do something else or your own cooking, we are available for coaching in that manner as well. So you can schedule for a free 20-minute consultation with us. You can just go online, and then our emails, I didn't put the .com on here, but it's jen@sweetpeaplantbased.com or kendra@sweetpeaplantbased.com. Okay, thank you very much, and have a great day and have a great week. Next month our webinar will be on gut health, so we hope you'll join us for that as well. Thank you, everybody.
Okay, thank you very much.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.